It's actually a perfect segue to the first halacha. There's an interesting halacha in Shulchan Aruch that the Shulchan Aruch says there's a halacha that a Jew has to have their Seder table set before Yom Tov. It's a fascinating halacha. It's actually like a Jewish law. In halacha, in Shulchan Aruch, make sure your table is set. And the reason for that is very simple. By the time you get home from shul, there's such a great deal to get done that night. The last thing that you want to get started with is worrying about if your Seder plate is ready, if you have all the matzahs, if the wine is there. So there's an actual halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Table has to be set in advance so that you're ready to begin right away your Seder. So we'll start with that as far as it goes. The reason for that is, he actually read the Mishnah Brooks explains, because the children need to stay awake. This is you need to get the children involved, and if the night drags on, and of course usually takes a long time to get started, and so therefore you end up with a problem when it runs very late.
So if you have older children or you're by yourself, it doesn't apply?
Still, even so, you're right. The real reason is, so the children can be involved before they disappear. But technically, yeah. But I guess we're all children on the night of the Seder, to a certain degree. To a certain degree. Okay, let's start from the top. There's a halacha at the Pesach Seder that you can't begin until nightfall, until Tzeisak Kochavim. So, for example, this year, sunset today was probably, I think when the Shabbos ended at 8:24. I think it's 8:32. I forget the exact 8:32, 8:33 next week. I think 8:34 if I remember correctly. You cannot make Kiddush until that time, which is very late to begin. And I get the question every year. From a number of families that have, for various reasons, either because of little kids or they have family members who just want to get started early, whatever it may be. Can we start at 6 o'clock? It's like a normal time to start dinner. It's true, it's a normal time to start dinner. It's just not a normal time to start the Seder. You just can't make Kiddush until whatever it is, 8:34. What's that? 8:32. It was right around there, 8:32. One thing which is relevant is that's a halacha of Kiddush. Kiddush has to be after nightfall. And the reason that's connected to being able to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah until it's actually Pesach, and so the Kiddush was attached to that. But remember, that's Kiddush. Now, many people have the custom at their Seder table of singing Kadesh, Orchatz. Some people sing it 5 times, 8 times, every tune every kid ever once knew. People have a minhag of blessing their children. It's going to be Friday night as well. All of those things can be done before nightfall. It's not a problem. There's no mitzvah that you have to sing Kadesh Orchatz after nightfall. You just can't make Kiddush. So if you know, as from past years, as I know in my house, from the time that we actually walk in the door and we say, okay, let's get started, until we actually get started is quite a significant amount of time. You can take care of all that. You just need to make sure that you don't make Kiddush until 8:32. Let's go through a couple of halachas before we even get to the sheet, which is just a brief way of keeping us focused. Both nights. Now the second night's even more complicated because the second night you can't even set your table or light candles or begin making any preparations until Shabbos is over, which is going to be 8:32. So the second night usually even goes later because you can't even get started on anything until after. So that really runs usually pretty late on the second night. So there's a reason why most people's second Seder goes faster than the first Seder. There are several reasons why the second Seder goes faster than the first Seder, but it gets started very, very late. Let's just talk through the different mitzvahs that we have and use that as a spring. What are the mitzvahs that we have to fulfill as far as the Seder night goes? So the first primary mitzvah on a Torah level that we have is the Higgadah Tolabincha, telling over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is a very complicated mitzvah to fulfill because it's a mitzvah that every single person at your Seder table has to fulfill on their own. They have to tell over the story or listen to the story being told on their level, according to da'ato v'sichlo, according to their level of understanding, their intelligence. And that means that at any one given Seder table, you might actually have 3, 4, 5 different requirements as to what needs to be discussed on what level in order to fulfill everyone's obligation of really telling over the story. Chazal gave us a number of tools to be able to do so, which is incorporated into the evening. For example, it's a story. Stories are great ways of communicating information. It's hard to tell a story, but we're supposed to actually tell the story. I spoke last Sunday night about the bingo game. If you were here or if you listened online, it's a fantastic mechanism to tell a story through the questions and the answers of asking the questions in order to fill out your bingo cards that everybody has to actually tell a story. Because sometimes it's hard to tell the story otherwise. Like, when do you just start telling the story? When do you go through things? But it's one method. You could listen to that online as far as being able to do so. The concept of shinui. Shinui is that we do things different. Everything about this night is different. And we're trying to fulfill the mitzvah of Chayiv Adam Liros Es Atzmo Kilu Hu Yatsa Mitzrayim. Every person feels as if he left Mitzrayim. And the way that we do that, stories, we do that through change. We do different things. I have a custom in my family to wear kittel. And one of the things that does is, it creates more questions, which is really the third tool that the sages gave us of questions. Questions. We learn best when we ask questions. We learn best when we're answering questions. We learn best through a dialogue. And the Seder should be structured. You should instruct all the people at your table. No lengthy divrei Torah. It shouldn't be that any one person has the floor for 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. What is everyone else doing when this one person is... It's supposed to be questions and answers, and questions and answers. So if you want the floor for a Dvar Torah, if you're running your Seder table, it should be a series of questions. Get people involved. Have them answering questions. Have them asking questions. If you want to run your Seder, a great way to run your Seder is tell everybody in advance when you come to our Seder table, everybody needs to be prepared with, you make up the number depending on how, 2 questions. So that they're not prepared with a long 5-minute speech, which everybody knows they're going to be listening to, and the person's mother's going to be listening to them, but everybody else is tuned out. Ask questions. And you call on different people without the Seder, ask a question. If somebody else answer the questions. Create a method of interaction and dialogue in which everybody is engaged, because that is the way that we learn the best. That's what the sages wanted us to do. With the manish to everything is a question. Pesach al Shuma. Why do we have the whole Seder is always a question and an answer. And the kittul, what I was just getting back to, is it just creates a change. It just feels different at the Seder table when I'm wearing a kittul, and that alone is worth it. That it's the same table we sit at all year round, except now something's different. And the kids ask, why are you wearing... Someone always will ask that question, why are you wearing a kittul? And I really don't have a better answer other than, because this night is different than all other nights. That's why it's different. It's nice, purity, Yom Kippur.
You're Hungarian.
I'm Hungarian, that's why. I tell them, you need to know you're a Hungarian. It's important for you to know that you're Hungarian. Especially because there's no chandelier in my dining room, so they otherwise wouldn't know that they're Hungarian. So it's important that I communicate this heritage to them in some other manner because of that. But we do things different, and you should embrace that. One other point on that, and that is, I've told the story many times, so I apologize if you've heard this from me. When I was in Ner Yisrael right after I got married, a former roommate of mine, we both got married the same year, and we lived close by. After we got married, we were a 10-minute drive away from the yeshiva. So we used to carpool. We used to carpool into yeshiva every day. He would drive one day, I would drive the other day. That's it. This is the world before 2 cars. Back when things were simple and much more complicated at the same time. So whenever I'd be in his car and we would drive to yeshiva, he had a children's. It was actually a cassette back in the day. It was an actual cassette tape, and it was a children's cassette. Neither of us had children. We just got married. And he was listening to like Uncle Maishi and the Marvelous Midas Machine, stuff that would grate on your ears. And I asked him, like, why? Like, we were learning in Kolo, a young married guy. What are you listening to this for? And I remember him telling me, he said, because this, when you listen to what they talk about. When you talk to children, you say it straight. Be nice, be good, be kind, believe in Hashem. There's Olam Haba, all the messages that we have. There's no sugarcoating, no fancy drush on a Shabbos morning where the rabbi has to come up, find this nice message and a story and tie it into this. No, it's just straight. It's just plain. It's the way that it is. So he said to me, this is the best Musar. I listened to this on the way to yeshiva, and it's just the greatest. Now, I share that because hopefully you'll have not just adults and your children, you might have some children. When you're talking to the children, and you should, that is a key component of the Seder for everybody. You think we're just playing a game of bingo, or we're just talking to the kids about what happened in Mitzrayim, about the plagues. the purpose of this evening, of telling over this story, is strengthening our emunah. That's the goal, at the end of the night, that we feel, I have more emunah in Hashem, more belief in the concept of the Creator at the end of the meal than I did at the beginning of the Seder. It's my goal. It's what I want to have. One of the great ways is we teach to children. And it's not just, oh, that's the children's part. There's a children's part, there's a grown-up part. You have to tell the story on many different levels. But during that section, as we're either listening or talking to the children, it's the best. You just say it straight. Hashem did this, and Hashem did that, and Hashem showed himself like this, and he took us out of Mitzrayim. And the words that we sometimes are more difficult for us to say as grown-ups to adults, to talk to kids, you say it exactly the way that it is. And it's a critical component for everybody at the table. And sometimes the greatest moments of the Seder is when you're focused on a 4-year-old, but really you're saying it exactly as it needs to be said. That's one mitzvah of the Seder, to tell over the story, every person according to their language, for the purpose of strengthening our emunah, with all the tools that we have, change, we do things differently, we ask questions, it's in a story form, all of those things in order to be able to do so. Okay, let's talk about, let's just go through some of these and we'll use them again as a springboard. I mentioned already that you begin immediately to complete as much as possible before the children fall asleep. Women are as obligated as men on all the mitzvahs of the Seder, even though the mitzvahs of the Seder are what we would call a mitzvah laseh shazman grama, time-bound mitzvahs. And generally, women are exempt from time-bound mitzvahs because of various reasons the Gemara derives. When it comes to the Seder, they're just as prohibited from eating chametz, they're just as obligated in eating matzah. Chazal included them in the mitzvah, the rabbinic mitzvahs of drinking the 4 cups of wine. So we are just, women and men are equally obligated and should be part of the Seder, part of the telling of the story, drinking the 4 cups of wine, eating the matzah, as much as everybody else. Let's talk about for a moment the drinking of the wine while we mention the 4 cups. How much do you have to drink? How big does your cup have to be? So there are many opinions out there. They range from about 3 ounces is the minimum amount that you should have, a 3-ounce cup. And you can find cups that are smaller than that. So you should make sure that everybody at the table has a cup that holds at least 3 ounces. And how much of that do you have to drink is also very important. You have to drink, there are 3 levels. Ideally, the entire cup, which is another reason why it's good to have a smaller cup, not 2. Some people have these big goblets. Ideally, you should drink the whole cup. If you can't drink the whole cup, at least half the cup. And if you can't drink half the cup, then what we call half of a revius, which is about 1.5 ounces. So 1.5 ounces, a 3-ounce cup is a normal size cup, just a little bit smaller than a regular Kiddush cup, which probably holds closer to 4. You have to drink half of that cup. So those who often they take a tiny little sip, that's not called drinking a cup of wine. One needs to drink 4 cups of wine, and drink it is at least 1.5 ounces. Really should be half the. So 1.5 ounces, even if you have a 4-ounce cup, you need to drink at least 1.5 ounces, whatever size cup you have. Ideally, at least half the cup, if not the whole cup. So you should make sure at least to fill a cheekful or 2. As you drink each one of the cups. What kind of wine or grape juice do you have to have? So as long as it's wine or grape juice, you're going to fulfill the obligation. Ideally, red wine is considered the best. Wine, because of its intoxicating quality, is a sign of freedom, of being a ben chorin, of being freed people and enjoying the ability to drink wine. Even if you generally don't drink wine during the year, there are people like that I've heard. It's still better on Pesach to drink wine, unless it's really going to hurt you, then you shouldn't cause yourself great pain. The hierarchy is generally red wine, white wine, grape juice. Some people like to add grape juice to their white wine to make it red. There are 2 reasons why red is considered preferable. One is that it was considered an actually higher quality wine, and 2 is that it reminds us of the blood that flowed freely of the Jews when they were in Egypt. Which parenthetically I'll mention, many things we do during the Seder have literally contradictory components to it. That we drink wine as a sign of freedom, and we like it to be red to remind us of the blood. We have maror, of course, at the table, and matzah, which is both a poor man's bread and the bread of our freedom. Many things have the same idea, the same component, during the opposite components at the same time. In any case, so red is considered a higher quality wine, and it reminds us of the blood. If your white wine is actually better, so then that's fine, and you can use it. Certainly, you can use grape juice if that's more pleasing to you. But you should have a cup that's at least 3 ounces. There are those opinions who would say 4.2 ounces, and you need to drink at least minimally 1.5 ounces each cup. Okay, number 4. Let's talk a little bit about reclining. So it's preferable to recline while eating throughout the entire night. The requirement to recline is limited to the 4 cups of wine and matzah. So the main times that we lean, 4 cups of wine, and then we have 3 different times that we eat matzah. The first time we eat matzah during motzi matzah, then we eat it the sandwich 2 minutes later, korach, and then we eat again for the afikomen. Those are the main times that we lean. Now, just a word on leaning. Leaning in the times of the Mishnah, which was a time when the Romans ran the world, they had, I think they were called a shez. Do I have the right word? Yes. That's how they said. They would sit down and they'd have the little grapes, and maybe their servant would put the grapes down. And that's how royalty sat. And so the sages established that that's how you should eat it. The Pesach Seder, and everybody would be lying down and really feeling royal. That was a beautiful thing. Today, it's actually a little odd what we do, just to say it straight, because nobody sits like that. We sit at normal chairs, and leaning to the side isn't really a sign of royalty. If somebody would watch us at our Seder table, they really wouldn't say like, "Oh, kings, that's how kings eat." It's really not. It's an unusual behavior in our normal modern day and age of eating. And therefore there are many poskim, it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch already 500 years ago, they didn't do this anymore, who said it's not necessary to lean because it's no longer the sign of freedom. But we still do it. We try to situate the chair and a pillow in a way that it's somewhat comfortable, even though it's not a traditional sign of royalty anymore, but that's what we still do. But because of this, the significant reason why I'm sharing this is because of this, if one did not lean, it used to be, if you didn't lean when eating, you would have to eat it again. You'd have to drink your cup of wine again, and you'd eat your matzah again. You'd have to do that because you didn't eat it appropriately. You have to eat reclining to your left. But today, because it's such an unusual thing, we are much more lenient if one forgot to recline. I gave you a number 5. You have it that there are times you can drink another cup. At the end of the day, we are lenient with leaning again because of the time that we live in, where it's not a usual thing. Of course, ideally, everybody, you should lean. You should lean for all 4 cups of wine. You should lean for the 3 times that we eat matzah. That is how we do it, and it's all part of the shinoi, the change that we do on this night, in order to be able to feel that we have left Mitzrayim, to feel the strength and emunah. So you 100% should. I'm saying if you didn't, you don't need to necessarily do it again.
Why do women not? It says here what women.
So women, for sure, because we were not accustomed to doing it anymore, we're much more lenient on a woman. Some say they don't even have to try. Ideally, you should. I would say that's what we do on Pesach. It's part of the Seder. It should feel different. It should feel. We should do things that make us feel like Ben Chor and free people, even if the actual behavior doesn't necessarily fit our world, because of that's what it is. Yeah.
Where's the source for drinking 3 ounces of wine?
It comes from what is a revius. So revius is a certain measure, and whenever the sages established a mitzvah to drink wine, Kiddush, Havdalah, all sorts of different. Havdalah is sometimes we can be a little more. Different times when that's the shear of what's considered drinking. So, for example,
the revius is 3 ounces.
So there are many opinions. So the more lenient opinion that we go with is 3. There are those. Rav Moshe had 3.3. The Chazon Ish was 5.2. There are a number of different opinions, but 4 cups. So you could be. So some want to be more stringent on the first cup. The first cup, which we use as kiddush, in addition to just the 4 cups, they'll use bigger, but switch cups around here. But at least my main point is it's at least 3 ounces. Sometimes you get small little cups. It really should be at least 3 ounces, and you should drink at least 1.5 ounces. Even if you have a bigger cup, but you need to drink a little sip. Really, just doesn't fulfill the mitzvah of drinking a cup of wine. Okay, number 6. Mandatory that all participants understand the text of the Haggadah. I think this is straightforward and self-understood, but it's worth saying. I remember I grew up in my grandfather's house. There's a Chron Levracha. The Seder tables everything was in Hebrew. We read the text of the Haggadah as it was, and everybody went around. And we said Divrei Torah, and I was at a Seder with grown-ups my whole life. I only remember being at a Seder with grown-ups because my first memories. I'm sure I was at a Seder when I was a little kid, but I don't remember anything. I don't have any memories other than when I was like at the end of my high school years, and my sisters were only a couple years younger than me, and then for the next 15 years. Those are my memories of the Seder. So the first Seder that we made, when we were in Atlanta, and I'd become the assistant rabbi, it was the first time that I wasn't at my grandfather's Seder, which was traumatic in its own right. But I imagined I was going to run the Seder the way a Seder is supposed to be run, as my grandfather did. I'm sure as he saw his grandfather from Hungary, and that's the way we did it. And it was a disaster, total and complete disaster, because I had lots of children at my table, and I had lots of guests who didn't grow up in yeshiva, and I had in my mind that the only way to say the Seder is that the leader chants the whole thing through, and stops whenever he feels like it to share pearls of wisdom, and everybody else sort of mumbles along because that's how I grew up. And it was the worst Seder ever. It was a disaster. It was a disaster for the guests. It was a disaster for me. The whole thing didn't work. And because of this halachot, it was nice that I understood what I was saying, but nobody else understood what I was saying. It wasn't meaningful to anyone. And as much as we have the text in the original Hebrew, what's most important is that everybody understands what is going on as we tell the story. I'm sure every family has their customs. Certain parts of the Haggadah are said quicker than others, but it needs to be some leaders say, some everybody say. You go around the room and everybody takes a turn. It's all good, whatever you do, but that the text is understood. The text is understood as necessary. One of the suggestions that I like to share that I discovered just from trial and error, if you have a table like I often find myself at, where there are many different people at the Seder table, some who want or need more explanation on various different levels, is I share. We play a game at my Seder table, and that is a great way to tell the story. We play bingo. We've played different games over the years, and I tell all my guests and my family that during Magid, this is what we're doing to tell the story. And that's, we play that right in the very beginning, and we literally go through the story through the mechanism of the game, and then we zip through Magid, and I tell all my guests who I know have lots of fancy Divrei Torah that they want to share, I say, during the meal, that's when we're sharing all the Divrei Torah. So that during Magid, we literally tell the story, we play a game, it's engaging and it's fun, and then during the meal, those who have prepared their booklets, I say, I want to hear it. I can't during Magid because there are too many other people that doesn't work for. So we literally set up in advance when we're doing what, so that everybody gets what they need, and hopefully it works in that way.
Where does the text of the Haggadah fit into that?
So then after the game, we do it pretty quickly. And I tell everybody, so this is how we're going to do it, and then we're going to zip through the Haggadah, and then during the meal, that's where we're really going to have, and that's where the older kids share whatever they have to share. If we have some other guests who like to share, I have found it works well, because if you have a homogeneous table where everybody wants to sit at Magid for 3 hours, and it's great. I haven't been at one of those. It's not a homogeneous table.
How about the kids, like ages 6 to 11, that are really learning the law in school?
Right. So
when are they giving over?
So it depends. Do you have others at the table who can't sit?
But if you have a mixture.
So you need to. Listen, everyone's task is to figure out who they have and just set it up so that the meal is a great segue to fill in for that which can't be done during Magid. Whereas the mitzvah is kol amisapra kol also halal, the entire night. You have to tell the story. So some of it's going to happen during Magid. And there's only, let's say you have 4 kids at the table between that age bracket, and they all want to talk for 25 minutes. It just doesn't work. I mean, maybe it does. You can't. So you give each kid their 2 different Torah, 10 minutes, whatever it may be, and you tell them, but I want to hear it during the meal. and then which really accomplishes two great things. Besides for the fact that it gives the children the opportunity to say what they want to say, it also keeps your meal focused on what it's supposed to focus on, which is really, I find, the most valuable thing is that when we didn't like lose the whole Seder table during the meal, and all of a sudden we ended up somewhere where I didn't want to be, not at the Seder table, but that's what happens. People get together, it's fine, but just let's be doing lunch tomorrow during the Seder. So this way, it keeps it focused on, it gives the kids the time that they need, but it just keeps things moving earlier, and it keeps the meal focused on Seder talk, which I always thought was a great mechanism to keep everything focused.
Can you repeat a bit about your bingo game? How long does that take?
So I did this. Yeah. So I did this on last Sunday night. I'll do it very, very briefly. I found it to be an awesome game. What I do is I prepare cards. I have them. I can give them to you. Everyone gets their own individual card. It's got 25 words on it, and the words are like burning bush, frogs, the hand of Hashem, or the finger of Hashem, and then I give everybody chips. And then I ask questions. So I'll say, okay, Shlomi to my right. Where was it that Hashem first introduced himself to Moshe? And so he says, a burning bush. Like, great. And everybody who's got burning bush on their card gets to put it down. And then I'll say, okay, next. Which was the first plague? And they'll say, blood. Great. I could ask the questions on more difficult levels, but the answers are on the key. I have a key. And what it does, and what I explained at Great Length very briefly now, it's really not about so much the game. The game keeps everybody focused because people want to win. As soon as you play a game, it's amazing to watch. Grown-ups, kids, you put a game in front of them, and there's something that just boils up within them, and especially if you have a prize. You should, before Pesach, you buy a prize for the winner. First person who gets the first bingo, gets the second bingo, fills up the whole card, however much time you want to play with this. The reason why I play this game is because what I've now done is I've introduced the story. I actually asked the questions in order of the story. So I just introduced to my table, where did Hashem introduce himself to Moshe? Burning bush. Great. And now what I do is I say, and then I'll say to point to, I'll say, why would burning bush? And the person will give me an answer, and we'll talk about it for 10 seconds. Okay, next. And so what would have otherwise been very hard for me to bring up at my table, the idea of the burning bush, why is that significant? Now it was introduced through this game. And then we go to the first plague versus blood. Great, everybody's putting blood. And then I can throw out a follow-up question and say, that's an interesting first plague. Why was that important? And we have a quick 2-minute dialogue, or a little 20-second dialogue. And then next one, I have 25 questions that literally tell the story as you go through asking the questions and coming up with the answers. And if you spend a little bit of time, you can make up your own cards. And I said this, if you want to, let's say, put family history as one of the answers or whatever you want, you can also plan it in advance. As your table, I know that I have one, making up an example, I have one guy learning and coming back from yeshiva from Israel, and I have a 4-year-old cousin who's in a public school, who didn't learn much about Pesach. So I can, in advance, set up that to this one I ask the question of, who was the leader who took the Jews out of Egypt? It says Moses. Great. I make the kid feel like $1 million. He got an answer right. And then to this kid, I got a much more difficult question. And I have it set up in advance in which I know who I'm asking what to, so that everybody gets their moment. They get their question.
How long is the game?
So I will play the game for about 15-20 minutes. And I tell people, I say, this is our Magid.
It's before Kiddush.
I do right after Avadim Hayinu. We do Manashtana. We do Avadim Hayinu. And then I tell all my guests in advance, and I say, this is our Magid. We're going to tell the story, and we literally, through the questions, put the entire stories on our Seder table. We go through the whole thing, and then I say, then we're going to zip through Magid. And that's what we do. And then we read, everybody reads, but I hold off on the Divrei Torah, and then everybody knows, all of my kids know they're going to have to say a Dvar Torah at the meal. That's going to be something they prepared on their own or in school, but the story happens during and through the game. And I've done different games. I've done Jeopardy, where we literally were just questions and answers about the story. And I have found it's just a fantastic mechanism to get the ideas of the story out to once they're on the table, then it's easy to have a follow-up question. It's easy to say, what were the 3 signs, that Hashem gave Moshe that he was for real, or what were the Jewish people's response when Moshe came? All of those parts of the story which are not in the Seder. The Haggadah doesn't say how the Jews responded when Moshe came. The Haggadah doesn't tell us what the signs were that Hashem gave Moshe. The Haggadah given a structure for us, but the Haggadah doesn't actually tell the whole story. So this game really brings it all out in however much time. So it's worth it. I love it. I really have found it to be super successful in terms of engaging people because everyone gets a question. And if you really want, I said this, and I want to go over the whole class again from last week. If you really want to get people's like blood boiling, make it like boys versus girls. And a question that a boy gets right, all the boys on the table can put out their chips, and if the girls get it right, and then everybody's super engaged. They are like literally super competitive, and if you really want to cause something at your table, do family versus family. You know, like this family versus that. Oh man, you have everybody's attention. You're really playing a game on them because they think they're winning, but all you want to do is tell a story, and it works because they're into it. Like if they get it wrong, they can steal it. You can do all. It really, over the years we've developed this, and it's a lot. On my tape we do boys versus girls, and it makes everybody crazy. But they are so competitive about it, so they pay attention. So what's happening is we're asking questions, answering questions, and telling the story in a fun way. And if you have a couple of good prizes, it's a fun thing to do. I'm the rabbi, so I can get away with anything. I can tell my guests this is what we're doing for Magid, and they're like, okay. But it could be that you're like, I can't get away with that. Like they're not going to let me do that. I got to do Magid. It's totally fine. Do it during dinner. In other words, you could do the opposite. You could say, no, Magid's going to be traditional. People we do this, we're going to do it. During dinner, I have an awesome game to play with great prizes, and then you'll continue the story during dinner. So whatever really works. Based on whatever your family dynamics are, is fine. I have all the material if you like, but it's a great tool to introduce certain concepts to your table. Okay, how much matzah do you have to eat? The great question. How much matzah? So too much. Let me just go back for 1 second and talk about shmura matzah. The Torah says, "Ushmartem es hamatzos." You have to watch or guard matzahs, which means the Torah already said, "I can't eat chametz." So I know I can't eat chametz, so I have to make sure the matzah didn't become chametz. What's added by saying that I have to watch it or guard it? So we derive from there that it has to be specifically watched from a specific point in time to make sure that it didn't become chametz. There are 3 opinions as to what time that applies. So just for clarity's sake, the main opinion is that it needs to be watched from the time that the wheat was made into flour, that from that point it was watched to make sure that it didn't become chametz. The average standard box of kosher for Passover matzah that you buy is considered shmura matzah from that stage. From the time that it was ground into flour, it's been watched, and that's considered, according to most opinions, shmura matzah. What we call shmura matzah is matzah that was watched not from when it was ground into flour, but from when it was harvested in the fields, and it still is a stalk of wheat. Already from that point, it was watched for the sake of making it into matzah to make sure that it didn't become chametz. That's the term. If you buy shmura matzah, that's what it refers to. Regular OUP or MKP or CORP, whatever it may be, kosher for Passover matzah is considered shmura, but just from the later stage. So why do I say this? We ideally, at the Seder, need to eat shmura matzah. That's clear. So ideally it should be shmura matzah in the best fashion, which is what we would call shmura matzah. But you should just know that every single kosher for Passover matzah that you buy is officially shmura matzah. It's just not in the ideal form where it's been watched from the time that it was cut. It was only watched from the time that it was ground into flour. So if that's all that you have, or you can't eat shmura matzah, you can't, whatever it may be, every matzah you can use for your Seder. Ideally for your Seder you should use what's actually called shmura matzah because that's the highest level of shmura matzah. That is mainly a Seder halacha. The rest of Pesach you can eat any matzah that you like. And there are, of course, those who are stringent and like to eat only what we call shmura matzah, the whole yontiv, but that's really not required because all of our matzah is really considered shmura matzah. So, but at the Seder night, ideally one should try to One should try to have what we call shmura matzah at the Seder, whether it be machine shmura or hand shmura. It's fine either way for your Seder. How much do you have to eat? So I'm sure you've gotten lots of cards and different opinions. It's a lot of matzah to eat. We actually eat matzah, as I said, 3 times at the Seder, as you know. Right away we eat matzah, then again for Korach, and then again during the Afikomen. The opinion, I meant to actually bring it. For the general size of your hand shmura matzah, if that's what you're using, that you could rely on, is about the size of your wrist, with your fingers a little bit extended. You just draw a little circle around your. That's sufficient matzah for your eating of your matzah. If you don't have to, some cards are extremely big sizes and shiurim. If you like eating matzah, you can do that, but it's just, that's about the size for the first time that we eat matzah, which is a mitzvah from the Torah. All the others, which are only rabbinic, you could be a little more lenient, and basically your 4 fingers together, just draw a little rectangle around your 4 fingers, and that's about the size of the matzah that you need to eat. Just as far as you should have a sense in your mind of how much matzah do you need to eat. The more the merrier. Every bite of matzah that you eat on Pesach is a mitzvah. So the first night, out of any night, the more you eat is fine. But again, there's a lot of matzah to be eaten. And it should be leaning to your left, and ideally it should be eaten within a 4 to 5 minutes time frame. Maximum you can go up to 9 minutes. So like, how long do I have to eat that matzah? So you have 4 to 5 minutes. You should eat your matzah. Max you can go all the way up to 9 minutes, but no more than that in order to be considered eating. Just like you have to drink 1.5 ounces, ideally 3 ounces. There's a certain amount you have to drink to be called drinking. There's a certain amount you have to eat to be called eating. So that's your ideally 4 to 5 minutes. You can go up to 9 to be able to eat your matzah. There is a stringency that many hold that the first time we eat matzah, they try to eat 2 kizesim, 2 measures of that at the same time. If you're up for that, that's fine. But at least make sure you eat 1. And I say that again in the same sense as sometimes I see people take a quick sip and they think they've drunk, that's called drinking a cup, they take a little bite of matzah. You have to, it's the size of matzah, you have to eat a nice size, it's not massive, but you have to eat some matzah. Okay.
Drinking the wine also, the amount that you drink, it has to be all at one.
A little bit less than that, a little less than 4 to 5 minutes, but yeah, it's within 2 minutes you should, it doesn't have to be one big gulp, but it should be within a minute or 2 you should eat that. Okay, murr. Let's talk murr for a minute. Murr also requires a certain shear of eating, and what kind of murr do you eat? So I'm sure people have different opinions. The 2 main ones that I'm familiar with, and there are others as well, either people eat romaine lettuce, either the leaf or the stalk, or they grind up horseradish. There are pros and cons to each. The pro to the horseradish is that it's bitter. It makes it feel like you're eating murr. It's like the real deal. The problem with the horseradish is that you have to eat a shear. You have to eat a certain amount. You have to eat a kazayas of horseradish. So if you're, I've seen a few people do that, but that's like a lot of horseradish to eat. And I mean, you'll have steam coming out of your ears. So, and the pro, so the romaine stalks, especially if you eat the stalks, you can get a shear, you can get an amount of more pretty easily. A couple of 1 or 2 stalks, you're good. The leaf you need a little bit more because it's very thin. But the advantage of the disadvantage of the romaine is that they just have to be checked for bugs. Very often romaine lettuce is very buggy. It needs to be looked at to make sure that you're okay with that. What I always like to do, this is just a personal, I do both. I take the romaine stalks or the romaine leaves because I can eat a significant amount of it pretty easily, but there's no bitter taste to it, so it doesn't feel authentic to eat romaine lettuce. It works. You're yoked, so you fulfilled your obligation. I don't know, it doesn't feel right because it's like, this is what I buy a salad and I have romaine lettuce. So like if I would go to a store and buy a romaine lettuce salad, so like why does that count as murr? But it does because it's one of the species that you could use for murr. So I always like to sprinkle some nice bitter horseradish on top of that, and you're good. You cannot use, by the way, the store-bought horseradish. That doesn't work because that's been processed and cooked. It has to be, if you're going to grind it, you got to do the real deal. You go to buy a root. What do they call those things? Is it a root? Yeah, you grind it up before Yom Tov. This year is Shabbos. You can't do that on Shabbos. Grate it before Shabbos. and sprinkle some of that on your stalks. I find mar is similar to people do hagbar. When you see people do hagbar, there's like the showing off, like how many columns can you do? So like how much like real mar can you handle? Okay, so the idea is to feel the bitterness. There's one that's part of the Seder. We experience this. The way we experience freedom is by first experiencing the servitude. So okay, so if that's how people like to, all right, no problem. You can do as much as you like. So in any case, that's the that's the mar. Afikomen ideally should be eaten before halachic midnight, which this year is going to be 12:53 a.m. So if you're playing your bingo games, it's such a successful game, you're playing bingo all night, and it goes all the way till 1 o'clock in the morning. So someone's going to say, we have to stop playing bingo, we have to eat the afikomen. So before 12:53 you should eat afikomen. If you didn't get there for whatever reason, you can eat afikomen afterwards, but ideally it should be eaten before 12:53. That, of course, is the last food that we eat over the course of the night, other than the last 2 cups of wine. You still can drink water, but it should be the last taste that we go to sleep with at night is the taste of the afikomen. Okay, those are just a few, just to get us into the Pesach spirit as we go through some of the halachos. Any other questions or things that I didn't cover that you have in mind that we should talk about? This is a quick review. So in any case, so those are just some of the basics of maror, of matzah, the amount, always leaning to the left, of course, with the matzah, the 4 cups of wine, red, white, grape juice. You could add, of course, grape juice to your white wine. You could add grape juice to, if you want to dilute your wine, add some grape juice if it makes it easier to drink as well. Telling over the story, to feel as if we ourselves left Mitzrayim. That's the goal. To experience it, yeah.
We eat an egg before the supper.
Yeah, so karpas, let me take one step back. So karpas, the beginning of the Seder, we dip our karpas into salt water. Ideally, we should eat less than a kazais, a small amount. We just get started with the karpas. Is the eating of the egg before the Seder or just during the Seder?
Just before. No, that's just before supper.
Right, so the egg is on your Seder plate. There's a custom to put 2 foods, the shank bone corresponding to the korban pesach, which is roasted, and the egg, which is cooked, corresponding to the other korbanos, the korban chagiga that's brought, and it should be eaten. I don't know if there's a specific, you do it before the meal, that's fine.
No, that's not the egg.
No, you're asking for something else. Extra eggs.
Whole egg, is it okay to cut in half?
A whole egg that you get into salt water.
Besides for karpas.
You don't see a brocha on it.
Right. I'm not.
You don't know that.
Are you really Hungarian?
You're really Hungarian.
Where did you get that from?
No, it's a custom.
That's a custom? Yeah, it's a big Everybody does that? It's a Canadian thing. It's a Canadian thing. Why? What's the reason for that? Anybody know why? Why do you dip the egg in salt water? So the kids will ask. No, but doesn't that mean that, in other words, in Manishtana we saying that we only did, tonight we did 2 times, right? That means you guys are dipping 3 times.
Dipping, dunking, it stays in there.
You just keep it in there, because you dip the karpas in the salt water, you dip the maror in the charosas, and then you dip the egg in salt water. That's 3.
It swims in salt water.
It's like a soup.
It's swim. No, seriously, this is a Montreal minute? Everybody does this?
Generations. Exactly.
You're making me question my Judaism. I wonder if I'm not really...
How do you make meat?
You know why?
Like crossing the Red Sea, which is salty, it grows up.
Uh-huh. Okay. As long as the children ask. I mean, as long... Okay.
Does any vegetable from the ground qualify as karpas?
Yes. Any vegetable qualifies as karpas. So I use a potato because my grandfather came from Hungary. They didn't have anything but potatoes. That's what we used. Many people use parsley or celery. As long as it's a ha'adama.
$7, I don't know what it's called.
Alright, so no celery. If you want to feel servitude, so you'll buy servitude, you'll say like, I'm so wealthy, I eat celery at my Seder table. And when you make the bracha on the ha'adama for karpas, you have in mind that you're going to eat the maror later on, which is also the bracha of a ha'adama. So you make the bracha on karpas, and you have in mind that this will come with the maror that you'll be eating later as well.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Anything else?
Are you allowed to have non-Jewish people at the Seder table?
Excellent question. You're allowed to have non-Jewish people at the Seder. So this is a question that comes up. I'll tell you why this question comes up. The question comes up for two reasons. One is a halachic reason, and one is a philosophical reason. Let's start with Shabbos for a moment. Are you allowed to invite a non-Jew to your table on Shabbos? The answer is yeah, of course. Why not? And the reason why it's an of course and why not is because we sometimes might have a concern that a Jew would do something that they're not allowed to do on behalf of the non-Jew. That's the concern we might have. On Shabbos, we don't have that concern because Shabbos laws are such that a Jew's not allowed to cook for himself. I can't cook for myself. I can't cook for any of my Jewish guests. So since I can't do anything on Shabbos, meaning even for myself, so you can invite a non-Jew. On Yantiv, not on Yantiv, all Yom Tovim, Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuos, there's a concern in halacha that if you invite a non-Jew to your table, on Yantiv you're allowed to cook. I'm allowed to make a fire, I'm allowed to cook, I'm allowed to do all sorts of things on Yantiv. One second, but I'm only allowed to do so for a Jew. A Jew's allowed to cook, make a fire on Yantiv, but only for the purpose of Simchas Yantiv. I wouldn't be allowed to make a fire for a non-Jew, since that's not simchas yet. There's no heter of ochel nefesh, of doing things that you're allowed for a non-Jew, only for a Jew. So there's a concern that if you have a non-Jew at your yantiv, not at your Shabbos table, but at your yantiv table, where you might go to the kitchen and cook something new for your guests, which you're allowed to do on yantiv, but I'm not allowed to do that. Now I get stuck because I forget that I have something on my table and I end up doing it. So there's a concern of having a non-Jew. That's where that idea comes from. On Pesach, there's an additional issue, which is just a philosophical issue of on the night when we're celebrating becoming a nation and becoming the nation of Hashem. It's a funny thing to be celebrating that with somebody who's not a member of the tribe. Now, most situations where a Jew is asking the question of can I have a non-Jew at my table is because the non-Jew is somehow involved. Either they're dating someone and converting, or there's a reason. But those are the reasons why that question is asked. This year, the first Seder, which is Shabbos, there's for sure not an issue, because in the same way it's a Shabbos, you can't cook on Shabbos for a Jew, so you can't cook for anybody. So there's no question whatsoever on the first night. It's not. So it's just a philosophical issue. Okay, so if you don't mind, you don't mind. The reason why it's discussed is that's an interesting thing to bring somebody to the table when you're celebrating the unique nation. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but that's not a halacha. That's just so. This year, the first Seder, it's not a problem. Second Seder is the same issue as every Yantiv, in which there's a concern. So in general, if one does have or invites a non-Jew to the table for a Yantiv, so it's like many things that we do in halacha. We just need to remind yourself or have someone remind you that even though, let's say, even something as simple as making tea. So on Shabbos we make tea one way in order not to cook, and on Yantiv that's not relevant. You can make tea any way you want. Well, that's an important thing, that if I have a non-Jew at my yantiv table and I offer to make them a tea, that I have to make them a tea as if it's Shabbos, so that I'm not cooking, but everybody else at my table, I could just put, from the hot water straight onto the tea leaves because it's yantiv. I'm allowed to do that. So that's where it's an issue that one has to be aware of if having a non-Jew at the table. Same thing with wine, but that's a Shabbos, that's always, yeah.
I thought that a non-Jew is not allowed to eat from the hafakaman.
So
that it would be awkward to pass the hafakaman around and say you cannot eat.
So that's another issue. So the afikomen corresponds to the actual korban pesach. The actual korban pesach, that's true. In other words, you would not be allowed to give the actual meat of the korban pesach to a non-Jew. That's true. That's an interesting thing. I never put that together. That since the afikomen corresponds to the korban pesach, and the korban pesach couldn't be given to a non-Jew, that the afikomen also couldn't. That would be. I'm actually not familiar with that. I hear why that connection would be made. And that would be awkward if you said that you can't have this. But that gets down to the whole philosophical issue of the whole night is about saying we are a special chosen nation. Just sorry, It's an oddity, and what it ends up creating is that we almost temper our own celebration because we don't want to make someone feel awkward at our table, and then we end up not communicating to our children what we really want to. So that's why that's all a philosophical issue. But again, most of the time, when someone asks that question of can I have a non-Jew at my table, it's because that non-Jew is either converting or becoming involved or needs to be involved for some reason. But I would say if it's just a colleague at work that has no connection, Pesach, as much as the Pesach Seder is an awesome night but it really is our night. This is the night to celebrate being an Am HaNivchar, being a chosen nation, being the Am Hashem, Hashem's nation, and so
You'll have to whisper Shochan off.
correct. And then there's certain parts where we, and there's certain parts where like your we read them in Hebrew and they say like, why are you reading in Hebrew? Like, this is customarily just read in Hebrew. It's a funny, but it is an interesting thing, just historic.
Those who are hungry, let them come and eat, right? The door's open.
Yeah,
Correct, right? But that's for the Jew. It is. I just have to comment. It is a historically fascinating question that's being asked now in North America in the last 100 years. That is not a question that would have been asked throughout almost all of our history. The idea of, after, you talk from Inquisition, Crusade, Pogrom, Tachvitat, Holocaust, the idea of saying we wanted to invite a non-Jew to our faith, the blood libels that came out of the Pesach Seder were a disaster for the Jews, historically speaking. It's just historically, it's an interesting question that we live in a day and an age where we would even ask that question because that would be a normal thing to do. Is just an interesting historical note of the times that we live in. In some ways, to thank God that we live in such times. In some ways, we have to be careful because we live in such times, and life is complicated. But the fact that we don't have to worry about a pogrom breaking out in the middle of our Seder, not every one of our great-great-grandparents had that luxury. And so it is an interesting thing that we ask that question and we talk about that question, and that we should be in a position to say, sorry, this night's not for you. Is historically, it's significant that we live in an era where we could ask that question. Okay, anything else? Comments, questions? Yeah. Shalom Aleichem is various customs. Some people have the custom when Friday night falls out on a Seder to sing Shalom Aleichem, and many people have the custom not to. And that, there's no right or wrong. That's custom based. And if you do have the custom to say that, and you want to start before 8:32, Shalom Aleichem would be a great thing to get everybody to the table and get started. It's because you just can't make Kiddush until 8:32. But yes, so some have the custom to, some have the custom not to. That's really all. It's all based on how much the husband cares for his wife. Eish Chal, same thing. In other words, Eish Chal. So, but that's not what some of the customs do. That's not custom not to do. But those are all custom based. Both Shalom Aleichem and Eish Chal, some do and some don't. On a Friday night. Yeah. Okay, wish you all a Chakash v'Sameach, a wonderful Yontiv, and look forward for those who will be here celebrating together.